Salve a tutti amici di Comics Reporter e Fumettomania. Oggi abbiamo un'altra intervista con il grandioso autore, scrittore J.M.DeMatteis. Lo conosciamo tutti per l'ultima caccia di Kraven, per il suo Moonshadow, per la serie Seekers into the Mystery, per Justice League, eccetera, eccetera. Ha veramente scritto moltissime opere che sono rimaste nella nostra memoria di lettori. Intanto lo salutiamo. Hi J.M., welcome.
Hi, happy to be here and talking to you guys.
Ok, perfetto. Allora, cominciamo con la prima domanda. La prima domanda riguarda appunto l'ultima candidatura di Moonshadow. Il volume Moonshadow realizzato da te e illustrato da J.M.DeMatteis è candidato agli Eisner Awards nella categoria miglior riproposizione di vecchie opere. Raccontaci la tua sensazione. So, talking about the Eisner Awards, your Moonshadow comic book is nominated as Best Archival Project. What are your feelings about that?
Oh, it's it's always a delight and a thrill when something like this happens, when when the work gets acknowledged, especially Moonshadow. If I was going to pick the 2 or 3 projects that mean the most to me in my entire career, Moonshadow would be right up there. It's a project that I wrote fairly early in my career, and it was really the project that allowed me to step outside the kind of superhero Marvel DC mindset and just write from my own heart with my own voice for the first time. I was so thrilled with the reprint that Dark Horse did. I mean, they did such a beautiful job, and then to have it be acknowledged with an Eisner Award, it doesn't get better than that. And of course, I have to mention my collaboration with John J. Muth, one of the most extraordinary artists I've ever worked with, and also a very good friend. So for both of us, all these years later, to get this acknowledgement is a very sweet thing.
Ok, perfetto, perfetto. Allora, continuiamo questa volta con alcune domande fatte dal pubblico. Il pubblico ci chiede: ci sono dei personaggi su cui non hai mai lavorato e su cui vorresti realizzare qualcosa?
That's an interesting question. Because I've been doing this a really long time, as you know. So between Marvel and DC and all my work in animation as well, I've written so many of these characters. Now, there are characters that I love that I would love to return to. Doctor Strange, the Silver Surfer, those 2 characters that I adore. That I wrote those characters, but I feel like there's so much more to explore there. I'm also very fond of all the supernatural characters in the DC universe. Spectre and Constantine and all these great Swamp Thing, all these amazing characters. I wrote the Justice League Dark book for a couple of years, but there's so much to mine in that corner of the universe. But in terms of characters that I've never written, when I've been asked this question before, the one thing that always comes to mind is Fantastic Four. I've written some of the members of the Fantastic Four individually, but I've never written the Fantastic Four, which is the Lee Kirby Fantastic Four remains some of my favorite comics of all time. And in my mind, when I hear Fantastic Four, I think of me, Keith Giffen, and Kevin Maguire, the 3 of us together, having a shot at, say, a Fantastic Four miniseries, 6 issues or 12 issues. I think that would be tremendous fun. Tremendous fun.
Perfetto. Continuiamo con altre domande. Questa volta la domanda ce la pone Maurizio Clausi e ci chiede: qual è il fumetto di cui tu sei più fiero, del quale sei realmente molto fiero di aver scritto?
Okay. Is there among your stories a special one that makes you feel proud about having written it?
There's a lot of them, but as I started to say before, there's probably 3 that I love more than any of them. And one is Moonshadow. Another is an autobiographical graphic novel I did called Brooklyn Dreams, which if I was forced to pick one, it might be that. And the third is something that's pretty obscure that I think a lot of people don't even know ever existed, and it's called a Badazad. I did it originally as a comic book for CrossGen with Mike Plug. CrossGen went bankrupt. We never got to finish it. Disney Publishing came in and we did 3 books. We turned it into a book series, an illustrated book series for Disney Publishing. And again, it got cut off. So it's a story that I never got to finish. But it's one of my favorite things that I've ever done. Collaborating with Mike Plug is one of my favorite collaborations ever. And so, you know, if I was forced to pick like 3 projects, those are the top 3 that I would pick. And again, 3 great collaborators: John J. Muth on Moonshadow, Glenn Barr on Brooklyn Dreams, and Mike Plug on Abadazad.
Perfetto, ottima risposta. Continuiamo questa volta. La domanda riguarda una delle tue opere che realmente è rimasta nella storia e nella memoria di tutti i lettori, e riguarda praticamente l'ultima caccia di Craven. Però i personaggi delle tue storie, Jean-Marc, sono noti per le caratterizzazioni. Craven è soltanto un esempio. A cosa ti ispiri per realizzarli?
You know, the thing for me when I write is I tend to generally write from the inside out, from the characters out. It's not like, well, here's a great plot. Where do we fit the characters in? It's always about the minds and the hearts of these characters. I'm fascinated by the human psyche. It's always about, you know, what motivates these people. Like you bring up Craven. So there was a character that had been around for years and years and years and years. And honestly, I never really thought much about that character. I thought it was kind of silly. And then I started thinking about him one day, and the question is always, why? Why does this person do this? What happened in his life or her life? What motivates this guy to put on his leopard print pedal pushers, take his rifle, and chase Spider-Man around, you know? And so that's the fun of it for me as a writer. I always imagine you take the character, you saw off the top of their head, you get a flashlight, and you start to poke around inside their heads to find the things that make them who they are. And with characters that have been around forever, like Superman, Batman, these Spider-Man, the trick is to find a corner of that psyche that maybe no one has ever shined a light on before. You know, so for me, it's really all about that. It's all about the characters. Even when you come up with a great plot idea, it has to be something that helps reveal something really important in the hearts and minds and souls of the characters.
Ok, perfetto.
Ok.
Fabio.
Oltre ai fumetti, hai lavorato molto nel campo dell'animazione, come ad esempio il tuo Superman Red Son o Deathstroke Night and Dragons. Quanto cambia sceneggiare tra 2 media così differenti?
The biggest difference for me, well, there's 2 differences. One is that the average animated cartoon, especially on television, reaches many more people than the average comic book does. So you have a much bigger audience. But for me as a creator, the big difference is when I'm working on a comic book, even if it's something like Spider-Man or Batman, I'm very much in control. I'm working with an editor, I'm working with an artist, but it's about my vision of the story. You know, the editor's there to support my vision. The artist is there to support that vision and expand that vision, obviously. When you're working in film or television, it becomes a group effort. So especially when you're working on an animated TV show, because I'm hired as a freelancer to write episode 3 or episode 5 or episode 11. Well, they've worked out a whole arc for a whole season. You know, so I come in and they say, this is what we need for this particular episode. And I'll sit down. I'm in New York, they're in LA. So usually it's on the phone. And we'll discuss the story that they want to tell that works to help support their story for the season. So I become part of a team. I'm working with the producers, or if I'm lucky enough to be working with the directors. And as a team, so I have to take off, you know, when I'm working at home, I have my hat on. This is my story. When I'm working in film or television, I take that hat off. I put on the hat that says I'm part of a team. And that's really fun for me because, you know, what we do as freelancers, it's, I always say I get paid to be locked in a room and play with my imaginary friends, you know? So it's me and my imagination. So it's great to get on the phone. You talk about Superman Red Son. So I'm on the phone with Bruce Timm, you know, one of the geniuses behind the whole DC animated universe. Jim Krieg, the producer, they're a wonderful guy. And the 3 of us get on the phone and we talk about story for an hour and a half or 2 hours with a story like Red Son, which is a very complex story. Peel it apart, put it back together, decide how to do it. It's really fun for me to sit down with other creative people and be part of a team and work that way. So that's the main difference. It's writing comics is much more of a personal thing. And even when it's a team, it's just sort of, there's an editor, there's an artist, and it's you, and it's your story. Whereas whereas working in television is much more collaborative. And sometimes it's more than just 3 people on the phone. I've had projects where there's like, 5, 6 executives on the other end of the phone, and everybody's got ideas and everybody's got notes. And your job is to take all that and still make it as personal as you possibly can. Bring as much of yourself and your heart and soul to that story, even when there's like 10 people telling you what to do.
Continuiamo con un'altra domanda, Fabio, per favore.
Ok, uno dei cicli che ti ha reso molto famoso è quello sulla Justice League. Del resto tu stesso hai menzionato Giffen e Maguire. Quindi vorremmo che tu ci parlassi di come è stato sviluppare quel periodo e quel tipo di storie così particolari.
Yeah, it was probably in a lot of ways the most just pure fun I've ever had. Keith Giffen and I, and Kevin Maguire also too, not as much as Giffen and I, but we have all continued to work together through the years on a lot of different projects because it's just fun. Keith is one of the most amazing imaginations of anyone I've ever encountered. I always say he's sort of like the Jack Kirby of my generation of comic book creators. Just ideas pour out of the top of his head. So he'll create these plots for the stories. He hands that over to me, and I have total freedom to write whatever I want. When you work with another writer, there's not usually that kind of freedom. Keith does the plot, and he doesn't care. He trusts me enough to know that I'll be able to play with the story and bring my own voice to it. Then I throw it back to him. He expands on what I do, and it's just fun. And then when you have an artist like Kevin Maguire, who can bring these stories to life with such his ability with facial expressions, with gestures, with just the humanity of the characters, is really one of a kind. I don't think anybody has ever equaled what Kevin does in terms of acting on the comic book page, But the main thing is, and going back to the beginning, on our editor, Andy Helfer, who was one of the best editors ever in the business and gave us all the support we could ever need and all the help we could ever need, trying to keep these 3 crazy people in line while we're working on that book. But it was just fun. It was so much fun that sometimes it didn't seem like work. You know what I mean? It was just fun. And it really, through the years, the many projects I've worked on with Keith and with Kevin, it's continued to be fun. And it's comic books. So shouldn't it be fun, right? It has to be fun. You're working on a comic book. But the freedom to be silly on that book, and yet always to keep the characters real. That was the balance, You want the humor on the one hand, but those characters have to remain real through it all. And in a lot of ways, because of the humor, I always felt those characters were more real than other characters.
Perfetto. Fabio, continuiamo con un'altra domanda, per favore.
Sì. Allora, spesso una bella storia dipende dall'intesa, come anche tu accennavi, tra disegnatore e scrittore. Non possiamo chiederti quale sia il tuo preferito perché sarebbe impossibile rispondere, però tra i tanti con cui hai lavorato ricordi qualche caso che possa, essere esemplificativo? Ok. Often a good story is based on the chemistry between the writer and the comic book artist. We can't ask you if you have a favorite one because it will be really impossible to answer. But do you remember a specific one that can, or a specific story that can fall in this case?
You talk about that. It's magic, really. You can't create it. It's just. I always say it's like when you walk into a party and you start to talk to one person, and they seem like a really nice person, but you're just not connecting. There's no chemistry there, and then you turn around and you bump into somebody else. You start randomly talking, and you hit it off. Just like that. There's chemistry there. There's magic there, and it's the same thing with writers and artists. I've worked on stories where I know I've written a good script, and I know that artist has done a very good job, but something about the 2 elements coming together never clicks. There's no chemistry. So the story just kind of lays there on the page. And then with other artists, you don't even have to think about it. It just happens. For one example, and you're right, it's hard to pick. I can't say this is my favorite. I've worked with so many amazing artists over the years. But one example of chemistry that I always go back to is when I worked with Sal Buscema on Spectacular Spider-Man. That made you happy, huh? and Sal,
that was really my thought. I thought
exactly that's funny. Well, there story. You go. There you go. And it's just Sal and I didn't particularly know each other well. He'd illustrated a couple of stories that I'd done. But you know, I wrote the plot for the first issue, and as soon as I got the art back, something in my plot clicked with him, something in his art clicked with me, and it was like from the first word, the first panel, something magical happened. It just did, and that went on for 2 years on that book. And if I was going to pick, you know, one of my single favorite superhero stories that I've ever written, it was Spectacular Spider-Man 200 when Harry Osborn dies. And it was just so much of that. With any of these projects, you can't remove the artist from it. I can't say, in the end, my story was so great because if the right artist isn't there, you know, we talk about Craven's Last Hunt or Moonshadow or any of these projects that have lived on for years. You remove the artist and say a different artist did that project, we might not be talking about it today. If someone other than Mike Zeck had drawn Craven's Last Hunt, there's a very good chance we wouldn't be talking about it today, even if every word in every panel was exactly the same. It's all about that chemistry. And I kind of love it because it's mysterious, because you can't create it any more than you can force someone to fall in love with you, you know? It's just either it's there or it's not. And that's the magic of comics.
Ok. Allora, bellissima risposta, veramente siamo tornati indietro nel tempo con queste fantastiche storie. Il tuo cognome ci fa ritornare un po' alle tue origini italiane. Puoi raccontarci qual è il tuo rapporto con l'Italia, visto che hai recentemente visitato, sei stato ospite di Etna Comics, quindi qual è stata la tua impressione, la tua sensazione?
What do I think? Let me tell you something. That was one of the greatest trips I ever had in my life. I'm half Italian. I had never been there before. I have a dear friend named Carlo Carle, who's a TV and film director there, who, well, look, first of all, the convention, they treated us so beautifully. I can't begin to tell you how beautifully we were treated there and what a great time we had there. My wife was with me. And hello, Salvo, if you're out there. And then we met my friend Carlo in Calabria, which is where my family's from. We hung out in Calabria in the town that he grew up. We found the little town where my grandparents came from. We were, again, these people I'd never met before just greeted me with so much love. And we went up to Rome, and it was just one of the greatest trips I ever had. And I got to tell you, I never felt more Italian than I did when I was in Italy. It was fantastic. I could probably talk to you about it all day. It's 2 years later, and my wife and I still talk about that trip with such gratitude and such joy and such love. It was fantastic. I love Italy.
Perfetto. Facciamo l'ultima domanda. Adesso, per favore, J.M., raccontaci quali saranno i tuoi progetti presenti e futuri.
Well, I have things in development that I can't talk about, unfortunately. So if you want to know about the things that are out there now, you mentioned Superman Red Sun, which is out now. Deathstroke Knights and Dragons, the full-length movie, will be out in August. Comics, I'm working on some comic book stuff now, unfortunately, that I can't talk about. So if you want to go out and get something that's reasonably new, we have the Moonshadow collection. I did a project last year for Karen Berger at Berger Books at Dark Horse called The Girl in the Bay, which first time Karen and I have worked together since the Vertigo days. So it was really fun, and it's a very Vertigo kind of project. Loved working on that. And a project for IDW, a big, fun cosmic adventure called Impossible Incorporated. I don't know if either of those books have come out in Italy yet. But if you can't, you can always get the American editions. So I have a lot of animation and comic book projects floating around out there, but those are the ones that people can access right now.
Perfetto, J.M. Sei stato veramente molto molto gentile. Ti volevo soltanto dire, ma tu lo sai benissimo, che il pubblico italiano ti apprezza e ti ama tantissimo, ricorda con molto affetto e con molto piacere le tue opere a fumetti. Per oggi, da parte di Comics Reporter Fumettomania è tutto, ti ringraziamo e ti salutiamo. Ciao.
Okay, this was the last question, and we will thank you for your time. And you know, for all the Italian reader, you are really a legend. And also, we were in Etna Comics still talk about your visit in the because it was really great.
It really was. It really, really was. Well, thank you both. And I hope we get a chance to come back to Italy. I would love to come back because, like I said, one of the best times I ever had in my life.
And we like it too.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much, guys.
Grazie, grazie JM, grazie mille. Ciao. Grazie.
Take care. Ciao.
Thank
Ciao,
you.
ciao.
Take care.
Bye.